what I like to do is talk about communication skills. So, firstly, to focus on the fact that when we speak publicly, when we preach, reality is something which the audience connect with. And as those who are preachers, this should be one of the easiest things for us as we're seeking to be honest and work with integrity. If you were involved in public speaking, this was a public speaking class, and you were learning to sell toothpaste, then I would say you need to really believe in that toothpaste. Because if you don't, it will come across, you know. But for us, hopefully this is something which is part of what we are, what we do. Shape is important. When you're communicating, there's a clear beginning, there's a process, there's an end. People are able to track with you. This next one is massive, and I can't stress this enough. If you're in a meeting and people can't hear you, then people will switch off. Volume is really important, and this is where you can help one another. One of the things you do on outreach is, the best you can, you get people who can critique you. Because you want this to be a learning experience. And one of the things is the area of volume. If you have a microphone, one thing we have to understand, it is a friend. It surprises me, maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but there's certain people that just don't want to use a microphone. We have this in our base. We're in a meeting, and maybe it's a staff meeting, and the microphone's being passed around, and someone says, "Oh, I don't want that," and then you're kind of trying to listen, Microphones are friends, and we use them not for our sake, but for our audience. Okay, it's not about us. So when the microphone's given to you, say, "It's not about me." It's about them. And but volume is really important. I've got here emotions, and what I mean by that is when we communicate, people do want to know we're human. Now, of course, if it's a very emotional thing you're talking about, then at times emotions can be quite overwhelming. And it's really hard to preach and weep at the same time. So that's really difficult. But there are times when emotions can be involved. The thing about emotions is we must not use emotions to manipulate the audience. Okay, so we do have to beware of that. But of course there may be times we're sharing a story or the scripture, or God's doing something in their hearts, and there may be emotions, and this is part of our humanity. We just have to be careful. One of the most difficult things is to conduct a funeral. If you're involved in ministry, the chances are you will come across. And when I was working on staff in my SBS staff year in Hawaii, we were doing door-to-door evangelism, and cut a long story short, there was a stretch of houses on the Big Island, and there was an empty church building at the beginning of this road, and myself and one of the other guys, we ended up being pastors of this little church, and we would do the door-to-door business, and we got to know some of the people. And then this lady came to us and she said, "My husband's just died and I want you to do the funeral for me." And this was really interesting because this was completely outside of my frame of reference. And she said that she'd already cremated her husband, so that was all done. And she was upset with the church that she was connected to because the pastor never visited her. I don't think she went to church much either, you understand. But he never visited her. And so anyway, we were in her eyes good people. And so I had that challenge. Okay, now what do you do with this? And you know, you have the ashes, and what do you do with the ashes? Do you spoon them out, or do you what do you do with the ashes? And so I had all these questions, and you know, you throw them out, the wind's blowing the wrong direction, you end up wearing the person, you know. Now, thankfully, there was a pastor we were friendly with, and I was able to call him and talk through. But that was a really interesting experience, bringing a message that was appropriate for that particular situation. And you know, it wasn't my relative, but it's an emotionally charged situation. And then another one is you'll probably get a chance to conduct a wedding. And I want you to know that I have married 4 people. 3 people. No, couples, yeah. I married 3 couples. Sadly, one I didn't do a good job, they're divorced now. I don't know whether that's my fault, but maybe I didn't do a good job.
All 3 are divorced?
No, not all 3. But again, you get this the situation where you need to prepare a message and the order of service and conduct the ceremony and the vows. And for me, those are the most stressful times, because it's kind of like you want to get this right. This is their day, and the last thing you want to do is mess it up for them. Wilrins, who runs the SBS Centre hub in England, years ago he wanted me to conduct the service for him and his wife in Germany, and he even gave me the passage to preach on. Some passage in Isaiah that to me was a bit random, you know. This was my passage. And so we do get these different opportunities that have different kinds of emotions attached, and of course that's all part of life and their humanity. But we do have to be careful, because being too emotional can hinder us from communicating well, but as I say, we don't want to manipulate. So just a few introduction remarks. I want to talk particularly about maintaining attention, and to say we all take mental holidays now and then when we're listening. That is just part of our makeup, and so you know that with your audience. You know that. The second thing is what I've called internal interference. Now, what I mean by that is that when you have a group of people, all of them are in different situations in life, different circumstances, and the chances are they've got issues that are going on that are demanding their thinking, and sometimes it can be quite extreme. One of our biblical teaching and preaching schools, there was a young woman, a German woman, and she had been dating this guy, and she was expecting to get married, and then he broke off the relationship. She'd done an SBS with us, and she was absolutely devastated. She didn't know what to do. All of a sudden, all of her plans and hopes and dreams crashed to the ground, and there was nothing. And she came and she talked with me, and she said, what do I do? And she was interested in taking the preaching and teaching school anyway. And so I said, well, why don't you come and do the school? We can be there, just kind of love you and support you through this time. And we were sitting in class and, you know, teaching away, and I looked at her and she was miles away. And I just knew that. And that was what she was walking through. It was hard for her, and that's nothing to do with the preacher. He could have stood on his head, or she could have done a creative dance or something, and this lady wouldn't have noticed. And so you get those extreme kind of things. But what we want to do is do our best to be people that are able to draw our audience back, knowing that there is this interference. Another thing can be the physical conditions of the room. We're going to talk about the use of space and these kind of things in a moment. But the physical conditions of the room, it could be that it is too hot. And it may be, if it's too hot, you can do nothing about that. Maybe you can. Maybe you can open the window. Maybe you can do something. But sometimes the physical conditions of the room can be awkward. We can have the time of day. There's certain times when it's easier and better to teach than others. Straight after lunch is difficult, I think, and it's not that we're wicked people, it's just the rhythm of our body. See, it's just our makeup. And that's why in sensible hot countries they have a siesta, you see. And they recognise that. And also the day of the week. Now, I remember a number of years ago we had a Crossroads DTS at the King's Lodge, and the leader said to me, "Philip, would you come and do an hour or an hour and a half of Bible study once a week over the course of the school?" And I thought, yeah, that'd be great. He said, "I want you to do Friday afternoon." And you know what? Never again. It really didn't work. Everybody had signed off. And if they asked me again, I would say no. That's how ineffective it was. I'd say, "I'd love to do it, but change the time." Now, if it had been a weekend seminar and people had arrived Sunday, had lunch, and then began the seminar, then that would be different. Because that is not the end of the week, that's the beginning of something. But just the normal rhythm of the week, there's certain times when it's a lot more difficult. And if you find yourself in that situation, then just know that. And if I find myself in that situation, often I will comment on that. I say, "Okay, here we are, and this is really tough for you guys. So I know that, but here we are, let's make the most of it." Okay? If you sleep, don't snore too loud, because you'll wake your neighbour. This kind of thing, so that we kind of are able to engage more. Maintaining attention, a bit more of that in a few moments. The other thing is give attention to evidence, sources, and the reliability of material. Sometimes when we are speaking, we might want to make a quote about something, want to give statistics. Maybe we want to make a quote from someone else. Then it's really helpful that we actually have the sources written down. It may not be necessarily that you go into long footnotes in your sermon, but you actually have the evidence if someone was to ask you. I remember a fellow, Pete Reed, he's a really good Bible teacher. He's now the principal of a Bible school in England. I remember he was preaching at our church once, and he came up with a statement that I thought was really quite remarkable. And afterwards I said to him, "Pete," I said, "can I know the source for that? I'd like to explore that." He says, "Oh, I don't know." He said, "I heard it somewhere." And that was a shame. Now, his message was still a good one. He's not a great sinner. But what we want to do is pursue excellence. And so it's good to have these things written down. And so often what we can do is hear something and think it's good and then pass it on. But it's good to do the research. Likewise, if we have not studied biblical languages, it's good that we also, if we're going to use, refer to the Hebrew or the Greek or the Aramaic, that we acknowledge that we're not experts, because what we're doing is relying on other people. Now, my pastor, he has studied Greek. He went to the Spurgeon's Bible College, which is a famous Baptist college in England, and he studied Greek. And he often would come out and say, now, he says, I do know a little Greek. He works at the kebab shop. And he says it every time, and every time people laugh, and I think, this is going to get old. Sorry, you've got to get old sooner or later. But when he talks, he talks because he's had, he's done some study in that. I can't do that. But what I can do is I can talk about someone who does know. And this, by the way, is where commentaries can help. Because the commentators invariably have studied in original languages. And we can say something like, now, according to N.T. Wright in such and such a book, what he says is, and then you talk about it. And so what you're doing is you are using these other people who have authority and are well known in this area to support what it is you're saying. And so that can be really helpful. Of course, there's some Greek words that everybody knows. Everybody knows agape, and sacrificial love. And so there's these kind of things that are just out there. But it's when we go into those sort of smaller points that giving attention to the evidence or sources can be really helpful. The other thing there is don't exaggerate. It has to do with authenticity as well. Now, this is not hyperbole. Hyperbole is a figure of speech where you exaggerate, not to deceive, but for effect, to make a point. But the other thing is it can be easy, because you want to make a point, you can overstate something. And we want to guard against that. I've included this. And the reason I've included this is because the culture we're in, it is not unusual that we might have a prayer line, or we might just want to minister to people. When you do that, if you're likely to do that, it is worth just being kind to the people you may be praying for. If you have had an amazing meal with lots of garlic and you're before someone and you say, kimchi, brother, brother, how are you? And they fall over, and it's not because of the Spirit. Or you're praying for someone and it's, so brother, let's pray, and hygiene can be something that we just need to give attention to. I do know that people who pray a lot for people, who minister a lot, they'll often have little tic-tacs or something in their pocket. And, So just not a big thing, but sometimes these things just need to be said. Oh, and incidentally, one of the kindest things you can do for your friend is talk to them if this is necessary. You see, one of the problems with this is we don't necessarily know it. And I have done this in the past, usually without success. I've talked to people because I think that basically they smell, and it's not just a one-time thing, but it's not unusual. I try to talk to them about it, and sadly, usually I get excuses or something. But nonetheless, this is something that's showing a kindness to people. If we have bad breath, we won't probably know it. And No one wants to go up to someone and say, "Hi friend, why don't you go and clean your teeth?" Why don't you do something? Because it's awkward. It's embarrassing to hear it. But actually, that's a real kindness. It's like telling someone they got food on their face. You know? It's a kindness to them. Say, "Hey, just..." but these things can be awkward.